Hello everyone, and welcome to Vale of Hearts, a place where love finds its way through the quietest corners of the soul. The ballroom shimmered under golden light, laughter echoing like crystal against marble. Among the crowd of billionaires and flashing cameras, a young waitress, Grace Miller, moved quietly, clutching a silver tray with trembling hands. Across the room, Nathan Cross, the powerful CEO everyone whispered about, arrived with his little boy, Oliver, a child too fragile for this glittering world. Moments later, chaos. The boy vanished under a banquet table, hiding from the noise, from the world. While others stared in confusion, Grace knelt beside him, her voice soft as snow. "It's okay. Breathe with me. 1, 2, 3. Every breath is a star you bring back to your sky." And for the first time in 2 years, the boy smiled. Nathan watched, frozen, realizing he wasn't just witnessing kindness. He was witnessing the beginning of something that could change everything. The ballroom glittered like a scene from a dream. Golden chandeliers bathed everything in warm light, while violins hummed in the distance, and laughter mingled with the sound of crystal glasses. The annual CrossGen Biotech Christmas Gala was in full swing, a night meant to celebrate success, charity, and the illusion of perfection. Grace Miller moved quietly through the crowd, balancing a silver tray of champagne. Her smile was polite, practiced, and a little weary. She was 23, a psychology student at Seattle University, working double shifts just to keep up with rent and tuition. Nights like this weren't about glamour. They were about survival. Still, there was something enchanting about watching people pretend their lives were flawless for one night. Across the room, the tall doors opened, and whispers rippled like wind through silk. Nathan Cross had arrived, the man who built an empire from nothing, the kind of billionaire who made headlines just by existing. Beside him stood his 7-year-old son, Oliver, a quiet boy with solemn gray-blue eyes that mirrored his father's. Nathan's presence commanded attention, but Oliver's small frame shrank beside him. Every laugh, every camera flash seemed to make the boy smaller. Grace noticed them while refilling glasses. Nathan exchanged handshakes, polite smiles, corporate pleasantries, a man trapped in his own perfection. But his son wasn't part of the performance. Oliver's breathing grew shallow, his tiny fingers gripping his father's hand until his knuckles turned white. Then suddenly, he pulled away and disappeared under one of the long tables draped in white linen. Nathan froze, momentarily breaking his composure. He called his son's name, low and steady, though panic edged his tone. But before he could move, Grace had already seen the small pair of shoes under the tablecloth. Setting her tray aside, she crouched down, lifted the edge of the cloth, and found a trembling boy hugging his knees. "Hey there," she whispered softly, careful not to frighten him. "You picked a pretty good hiding spot." Oliver didn't respond, just stared at her with wide, tearful eyes. Grace smiled gently. "It's too loud, isn't it? Feels like the world's crashing in all at once." He nodded, almost imperceptibly. She lowered her voice further, calm and slow. "You know what I do when it's too loud? I imagine it's snowing. Snow makes everything quiet, even the noise inside your chest." Oliver blinked, listening. Grace pulled a napkin and pen from her apron and drew a small snowflake. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "This one's magic. Whenever things get too noisy, you look at it, and it'll help you breathe again. Want to try it?" The boy hesitated, then took the napkin. He stared at the small snowflake, took a shaky breath, and another. The panic in his chest loosened. "It's quiet now," he murmured, his voice tiny but steady. Grace smiled. "See? You did that. The magic's inside you." Across the room, Nathan stood frozen. For months, he'd watched his son retreat further into silence, unreachable despite therapy and doctors. Yet here, in the middle of a noisy ballroom, a stranger had reached him with nothing but patience and kindness. For the first time in years, he saw Oliver smile. Small, real, fragile. Something inside Nathan shifted. When the gala ended, the music faded into the echo of clinking glasses. Guests left in a blur of laughter and cold December air. Grace stayed behind, cleaning the tables, humming softly to herself. It was late, and her feet ached, but the memory of the little boy's smile made it worth it. "Miss Miller," a voice called from behind her. She turned quickly, startled to see Nathan Cross still there. The tie around his neck was loosened, and for the first time that evening, he looked less like a legend and more like a man. "Mr. Cross," she said nervously, setting down a glass. "I'm sorry, I was just finishing up." He shook his head. "No apology needed. I wanted to thank you for what you did earlier." Grace frowned. "For helping your son? For helping him in a way no one else could," Nathan said quietly. "He hasn't spoken to anyone outside our house since his mother passed away." "Tonight he did." Her expression softened. "He's not broken, Mr. Cross. He's just scared. The world can be too much sometimes." Nathan studied her for a moment. Her tone wasn't pitying or overly kind, just honest. "That was rare. You study psychology?" he asked, glancing at the small pin on her blouse. "Child behavior," she replied. "I want to work with kids who see the world differently." Nathan nodded, his gaze unreadable. Then, after a pause, he reached into his pocket and handed her a sleek business card. "I'd like to offer you a position as Oliver's caretaker." Grace blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "I'm Mr. Cross, I'm not a nanny." "I'm not looking for a nanny," he said simply. "I'm looking for someone who can reach him." The room fell silent again. Through the tall windows, snow had begun to fall, soft and steady against the dark glass. Grace looked at the card, then at the man before her, a man surrounded by wealth yet carrying loneliness in his eyes. Finally, she gave a small smile. "All right, but only if I'm allowed to keep drawing snowflakes when things get too loud." Nathan's lips curved slightly, the first genuine smile he'd shown in years. "I think that can be arranged." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Oliver appeared from the hallway, still clutching the napkin snowflake. The boy looked up at Grace and whispered, "Good night, Miss Grace." Her heart swelled. "Good night, Oliver." As they disappeared into the snowy night, Grace exhaled slowly, not realizing that a single act of kindness had just tied her fate to theirs. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city glittered under falling snow, and a new story was quietly beginning. Snow still clung to the city the next morning, melting slowly under the pale winter sun. Grace stood at the tall iron gates of Cross Mansion, clutching a small duffel bag and a worn notebook. The estate stretched before her like something out of another world, all glass and stone, surrounded by acres of silence. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress built to keep feelings out. She hesitated before ringing the intercom. Her reflection in the mirrored glass looked out of place. A girl in a second-hand coat, standing in front of a billionaire's world. The gate opened with a soft hum, and a security guard greeted her. "Mr. Cross is expecting you, Miss Miller." Inside, everything gleamed. The walls, the floors, even the air. Screens lined the hallways showing news feeds, company reports, and digital art. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint hum of distant machinery. Grace couldn't help but think it was the kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from loneliness. Nathan appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his expression as unreadable as ever. He wore a crisp suit even on a Saturday morning, as if relaxation was something he'd long forgotten. "You're early," he said. Grace offered a small, nervous smile. "Habit, I guess. My professors say being early is a trauma response." That drew the faintest flicker of amusement from him, the kind of almost smile that came and went too quickly. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you to your room." Her quarters were modern but warm, a guest suite overlooking the frozen garden. On the desk sat a single white card with neat handwriting. "For your first day, welcome." No signature, but Grace knew who it was from. After unpacking, she went to find Oliver. She found him in the library, a space so vast it felt like it could hold an entire university. He sat cross-legged on the rug, surrounded by toy models of planets, his head bent low, avoiding her gaze. "Hey, space explorer," she said softly. "Mind if I sit?" He shrugged, not looking up. Grace sat anyway, noticing the precision in the way he arranged the planets by distance. "You got them in perfect order," she said. Mercury to Neptune. Not many people get that right. He looked at her then, cautious, curious. You missed Pluto, he said quietly. Grace smiled. Pluto's still there, just misunderstood, kind of like some people I know. A tiny smile flickered across his face before disappearing again. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Over the next few days, they built a fragile routine. Mornings filled with soft-spoken lessons and quiet games. Afternoons spent drawing or building things from paper. Grace introduced him to something she called the Paper Star Project. Therapy disguised as play. Every time Oliver felt anxious, he would fold a star from colored paper, write one thing that made him feel safe, and hang it on the wall above his bed. At first, there were only 2 stars, one for Mom and one for Snow. By the end of the week, there were 10, each with shaky handwriting. Grace. Dad. Quiet mornings. Stars. Nathan noticed. He often passed by the library door, watching silently as Grace worked with his son, the way her patience filled the room like light through frost. For years, he had relied on experts, charts, and clinical methods, but Grace used none of those. She just listened, and somehow, the world responded. One evening, as the snow thickened outside, Nathan found himself lingering by the doorway longer than usual. Grace sat on the floor beside Oliver, folding paper under the warm glow of the fireplace. She was laughing, not loud, but freely, like she'd forgotten where she was. The sound stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, the ache of remembering what warmth used to feel like. Oliver held up a red paper star. This one's for Mom, he said softly, because she liked red. Grace reached out, her hand gentle. Then let's make sure it's the brightest one. Nathan's chest tightened. For the first time, the sight of his son remembering his mother didn't hurt. It felt healing. But the spell broke when the mansion's security lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. Nathan's expression hardened instantly. He excused himself, heading toward his study, and Grace could sense the weight that followed him. Later that night, while returning a tray to the kitchen, Grace heard voices down the hall, sharp, hushed, and distinctly tense. She recognized one of them. Marcus Hale, Nathan's right hand and the company's vice president, was speaking on the phone in the adjoining study. She paused near the door, not to eavesdrop, but because the tone of his voice sent a chill up her spine. I told you the data breach is under control, Marcus hissed. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. Cross still believes it was an outside attack. We'll pin it on someone soon, a pause. Then his voice dropped lower. And about the project from the crash site, keep it buried. If that information leaks, we're all finished. Grace's stomach twisted. She didn't understand every word, but crash site and buried project echoed in her mind. She knew CrossGen had once worked on defense tech before shifting to biotech, and that Nathan's wife had died in a private plane crash 2 years ago. Could those things be connected? Before she could step away, Marcus ended the call and turned. Their eyes met for half a second through the crack in the door. Grace froze. He gave her a thin, knowing smile, polite on the surface but cold underneath. Eavesdropping doesn't suit you, Miss Miller, he said evenly. Grace straightened. I was just passing by. Of course you were, he replied smoothly, stepping closer. You're quite curious for a nanny. Where did Nathan find you again? Her pulse quickened, but she forced her expression calm. At the gala. Your boss offered me a job because his son smiled for the first time in months. That's all there is to it. Marcus's smirk didn't fade. Let's hope so. CrossGen doesn't have room for accidents. When he walked away, Grace exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. The warmth she'd felt earlier now mixed with unease. The mansion's perfect silence suddenly felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. That night, she stood by her window, watching the snow fall over the endless fields. Somewhere downstairs, Nathan was still in his office, the light under his door a single glow against the dark. Oliver was asleep, his wall now filled with stars, bright, fragile, hopeful. Grace touched the glass and whispered to herself, "What have I gotten into?" She didn't know that beyond those frosted walls, old secrets were beginning to stir, and that her quiet act of kindness had placed her at the heart of something far bigger and far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The storm that had rolled in overnight left Cross Mansion blanketed in white. Snow pressed against the windows, soft and relentless, muting the world outside. Inside, however, silence no longer meant peace. Grace moved carefully through the hallways that morning, the echo of Marcus's voice from the night before still haunting her. She couldn't shake the words. Data breach, crash site, buried project. Every instinct told her to stay out of it, but curiosity, that dangerous mix of heart and mind, kept tugging at her thoughts. Nathan, meanwhile, had barely slept. His study was lit by the blue glow of monitors, graphs, and stock charts. CrossGen Biotech's shares had dropped 7% overnight. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but the numbers didn't make sense. They were too clean, too deliberate, as if someone had sculpted them to appear normal while quietly draining the company's value. He stared at the screen, jaw tight. "Someone inside's manipulating the data," he muttered. Marcus stood across from him, calm as ever, hands in his pockets. "You're overthinking it. A system glitch, maybe. I'll have IT check." Nathan didn't look up. "No, this isn't a glitch. It's calculated. Someone's tampering with the analytics feed." He finally turned, his voice colder. "And whoever it is, they're close." Marcus's expression didn't flicker. "Then let me handle it," he said smoothly. "That's what you pay me for." Nathan studied him for a moment, then sighed, exhaustion seeping into his voice. "Fine. Find out who's responsible." Later that day, Grace joined Oliver in the library for their usual star session. The boy sat by the window, folding colored paper. The winter light made his hair shimmer like silver dust. "Dad's angry today?" he said quietly. Grace smiled softly. "Even grown-ups have storms inside them. But storms don't last forever." He nodded and picked up another sheet of paper. "Then we make more stars until it passes." Her chest tightened. This boy had learned to find hope in things most adults forgot. But as she smiled at him, her mind drifted back to Marcus's warning, the way his eyes had lingered just a little too long. Like he already knew she'd overheard something she shouldn't have. That evening, the first blow came. She was in the kitchen when two men in dark suits arrived. They looked corporate, the kind of clean-cut efficiency that came with expensive watches and colder hearts. One of them handed her a sealed envelope. "Miss Miller," he said curtly, "you're needed in Mr. Cross's study." Confused, Grace followed them upstairs. Nathan sat behind his desk, face unreadable. Marcus stood beside him, a laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. Nathan didn't look up. "Grace, is there something you want to tell me?" Her stomach tightened. "I'm not sure what you mean." Marcus turned the laptop toward her. The screen showed a trail of financial data, false entries, manipulated values, all linked to an employee ID. Her ID, Grace's breath caught. "What is this?" "CrossGen's internal systems were accessed using your credentials," Marcus said, his tone too smooth to be sincere. "We traced unauthorized data transfers back to your login last night." "That's impossible," she whispered. "I was in the library with Oliver." Nathan's eyes darkened. "The system doesn't lie, Grace." For a moment, everything blurred. The warmth of the fireplace, the steady hum of the monitors, the quiet sting of betrayal. "You think I did this?" Nathan didn't answer right away. His silence said more than words. Marcus closed the laptop. "We can involve the authorities if you prefer," he said, feigning sympathy. "But I thought it best to handle it privately, considering your situation here." Grace's pulse raced. She looked at Nathan, searching his face for the man who had trusted her with his child. "You know me," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You've seen me with Oliver. You think I'd risk hurting you or him?" Nathan's jaw clenched. "I don't know what to think right now." That hurt more than accusation. Grace took a step back, the room suddenly too big, too bright. "Then maybe I should leave." Marcus's expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker of satisfaction behind his calm mask. She turned and walked out, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Down the hall, she found Oliver waiting by the door, holding one of his paper stars. His eyes widened when he saw the packed bag in her hand. "You're leaving?" he asked quietly. She knelt down, struggling to steady her voice. "I think it's better if I go, sweetheart. Just for a little while." Oliver shook his head, his small hands clutching hers. "If you go, the snow won't fall anymore." The words shattered her. Grace closed her eyes, taking a trembling breath. "Oh, Oliver," she whispered, "the snow will always fall. You just have to believe." He looked at her, his lip quivering. "I only believe when you're here." Her heart cracked. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. "I'll come back," she promised. "No matter what it takes." Behind them, Nathan stood at the end of the hall, watching, torn between reason and something far deeper. Her words to his son echoed in his head, mingling with his own doubts. Logic told him to protect his company. His heart whispered something else. That night, sleep didn't come. He sat in his study long after everyone had gone to bed, the soft hiss of the snowstorm filling the silence. In the corner of his desk lay the napkin Grace had once given Oliver, the one with the hand-drawn snowflake. Nathan picked it up, tracing the faint ink lines. "She wouldn't do this," he said quietly, almost to himself. But the evidence, the fear of losing everything again, weighed heavier than faith. Hours later, when dawn broke through the frost-covered windows, a knock sounded at his door. It was Detective Rowan Pierce, an old friend and private investigator Nathan had hired months earlier to quietly revisit the plane crash that had taken his wife. Rowan removed his snow-dusted hat and stepped inside. "Nathan, I found something." Nathan's head lifted, exhaustion giving way to wary focus. "Tell me." Rowan laid a thin folder on the desk. Inside were photos, grainy images of wreckage, mechanical fragments, serial numbers. These weren't just fragments from a plane. Some of this tech belongs to CrossGen's defense project, the one you shut down years ago. Nathan frowned. "That's impossible. Those materials were never used for transport. Unless someone repurposed them," Rowan said quietly. "There's also a name, Marcus Hale. He signed off on shipments connected to that project, 2 months before the crash." The silence that followed was suffocating. Nathan stared at the photo, his wife's, wedding ring half buried in snow beside a piece of metal engraved with CrossGen's logo. His chest tightened, anger and disbelief mixing into something darker. Rowan's voice was low. "You told me to find the truth. I think you're about to realize it's been sitting beside you all along." Nathan's hands curled into fists. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering every trace of the past. But inside Cross Mansion, the ice had finally started to crack, and in another part of the house, Grace lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling, unaware that the secret she stumbled upon might soon be the reason she's hunted, or the reason Nathan finally learns the truth. The snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a city washed in white and gold. For the first time in weeks, the sky looked clear. Grace hadn't planned on staying in Seattle after leaving Cross Mansion, but fate, or maybe something gentler, had other ideas. She found herself volunteering at a local children's shelter during the annual Christmas festival, helping decorate trees and hand out cocoa. It wasn't much, but it made her heart feel steady again. She didn't know Nathan had spent days trying to find her, or that Oliver had refused to speak to anyone until his father promised to bring her back. When Nathan finally arrived at the festival, it was almost dusk. The streets glittered with lights, laughter, and carols, the air alive with the warmth only December could bring. He spotted them before they saw him. Grace crouched beside Oliver near the snow-sculpting corner, her cheeks pink from the cold, her hair dusted with snowflakes. Oliver was laughing, not smiling politely or forcing a sound, but truly laughing, the kind of laugh that came from joy. It stopped Nathan in his tracks. That sound had been missing from his home for 2 years. Grace looked up and froze when she saw him. Nathan stood a few feet away, still in his black coat, looking like he didn't belong in this bright, colorful place. But when Oliver noticed, his face lit up. "Dad, look, I made a snow fox," he said proudly, tugging Grace's hand to pull her closer. Nathan smiled, soft and genuine. "I see that," he he said, his voice rougher than he intended. It's perfect. Grace rose slowly, uncertain. Mr. Cross, she greeted, her tone polite but distant. He hesitated before replying. Nathan. Please, just Nathan. Oliver, oblivious to the tension, ran off to join a group of kids building snow forts. Grace crossed her arms, trying to keep her composure. How did you find me? Oliver did, Nathan admitted. He told me if I didn't bring you to the festival, he'd stop believing in Christmas. His attempt at humor didn't quite hide the weariness in his voice. She sighed. He's a persuasive kid. He gets that from you, Nathan said quietly. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The lights, the noise, even the cold. It was the first time they'd stood this close since that night, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. They ended up walking through the rows of small wooden stalls, the smell of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon in the air. Nathan kept his hands in his coat pockets, glancing occasionally at her as if trying to memorize the moment. You've been hard to find, he said finally. Grace smiled faintly. That's kind of the point when people think you're a criminal. His jaw tightened. I never should have let you go. You didn't, she replied softly. You just didn't stop me. For a while, they walked in silence. The sound of carolers drifted from the square. Children's laughter echoed under the twinkling lights. Nathan stopped by a booth selling handmade ornaments. He picked up one shaped like a snowflake. Small, glass, delicate. Oliver told me about your snowflake therapy, he said. He says they make the world quiet. Grace's expression softened. Sometimes that's all people need, quiet. He turned to her, his voice lower now. I used to believe in Christmas, you know, before the crash. Her heart ached at the way he said it, as if the word believe had become foreign to him. What changed? She asked gently. Nathan looked up at the sky, where snow had begun to fall again, slow and graceful. The night my wife died, it was Christmas Eve. She was flying back early to surprise us. I remember telling Oliver to wait by the tree. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. He fell asleep waiting for a door that never opened. Grace stepped closer, her voice barely audible. Nathan, grief doesn't mean you stop deserving peace. He looked at her then. Really looked. At the warmth in her eyes, the quiet understanding. I don't believe in Christmas anymore, he said softly. Grace smiled sadly. Then let me believe for you this time. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Snow fell around them like a silent promise. Nathan reached out instinctively, brushing a stray snowflake from her hair. His fingers lingered longer than they should have, and she didn't pull away. Their breath mingled in the cold, the air charged with something fragile and real. You shouldn't have come, she whispered, though her tone said the opposite. Maybe not, he replied, his voice deep and certain. But I'm not letting you walk away again. Before she could respond, Oliver came running back, waving a cup of cocoa for each of them. He grinned, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. We're a family again, he said proudly, and both adults froze, unsure what to say. Nathan's lips curved into a small smile. Grace's heart tightened, not because of the words, but because for the first time, they didn't sound impossible. The night deepened, and the festival lights glowed warmer. Grace, Nathan, and Oliver spent hours wandering the booths, watching fireworks shimmer against the snow. The tension between them slowly melted into something gentle. Laughter, shared glances, quiet confessions. It felt like healing disguised as a holiday. When the crowd began to thin, they stopped by the frozen lake, where lanterns floated on the water, each carrying a wish. Grace handed one to Oliver. What will you wish for? She asked. The boy thought for a moment. That we can all have Christmas together next year, he said simply. Nathan's hand brushed hers. Sounds like a good wish. She smiled faintly. Then you should make one too. He looked at her, eyes soft. I already did. It should have been a perfect night. But perfection never lasted long in Nathan Cross's world. The next morning, the photos hit every major news outlet. Billionaire CEO Nathan Cross spotted embracing young Nanny at Christmas festival. The images were everywhere, Grace's laugh frozen mid-motion, Nathan's hand brushing her cheek, Oliver between them smiling. To anyone else, it looked innocent. To the press, it was scandal gold. By noon, CrossGen's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Nathan stormed into the conference room, where Marcus sat at the head of the table, perfectly calm. "You leaked those pictures," Nathan said, his voice low, dangerous. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "They were public, Nathan. You made them public. The world just saw you compromise your position for a woman under investigation. What did you expect?" "Don't," Nathan warned. "You don't get to twist this." Marcus leaned back, his smirk barely hidden. The board sees a CEO distracted by his emotions while the company bleeds money. They're not wrong. When Nathan didn't respond, the chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Cross, the optics are damaging. The shareholders are nervous. Until the investigation concludes, we recommend you step down temporarily." Nathan's gaze swept the room. "You mean you're forcing me out?" No one met his eyes. The decision was already made. He walked out in silence, the weight of it pressing on his chest. In the hallway, Marcus followed, voice low. "Don't take it personally, Nathan. It's business. Besides, I'll make sure the company stays intact." Nathan turned to him, his jaw tight. "You've been planning this." Marcus's smile didn't waver. "And you made it so easy." Outside, snow began to fall again, just as it had the night his world first shattered. He stood in the cold, watching the white flakes drift through the air. Somewhere across town, Grace was probably seeing the headlines too. Her name twisted, her kindness turned into scandal. But Nathan wasn't the same man who hid behind his grief anymore. He knew what he felt and what he had to do. He took out his phone, his voice steady when he spoke. "Rowan, it's time. Dig deeper. Find everything on Marcus Hale. Every lie, every transfer, every project." As he hung up, the wind caught the snow and carried it down the street, the city glowing under the lights of Christmas. For the first time, Nathan Cross wasn't running from the past. He was walking straight into it. And this time, he wasn't alone. Snow fell again over Seattle, soft and deceptive, like the calm before a storm. It had been 3 days since the scandal exploded across every headline. Grace had avoided the news, but she didn't have to read the articles to know what they said. CEO and Nanny, the forbidden affair. Words designed to break reputations. Yet beneath the humiliation and fear, she carried one stubborn certainty. Nathan was not the enemy. Nathan, meanwhile, had spent those same 3 days trying to untangle the chaos Marcus had left behind. The board had stripped him of power, freezing his accounts and locking him out of CrossGen systems. But Rowan's investigation was moving fast. They had traced encrypted messages, offshore accounts, and a pattern that led straight to Marcus Hale. It wasn't enough for an arrest. Yet. But it was proof that Marcus had engineered everything. The data breach, the leak, the scandal. On the night the storm rolled in, Nathan sat alone in his study, watching the firelight flicker across the window pane. The mansion felt emptier than ever. Grace had moved to a small apartment across town, and Oliver, though safe, had grown quieter since the scandal. He missed her. Nathan did too, though he'd never admit it out loud. He picked up his phone and almost called her. Almost. But before he could, headlights flashed outside. A black car. Unexpected. He frowned, glancing at the clock. Too late for visitors. Seconds later, the mansion's alarm chimed once, then went dead. "Nathan!" His security chief's voice crackled through the intercom. "Someone's breached," the line cut out. Nathan was already moving. He sprinted down the corridor, heart pounding, reaching Oliver's room. But the door was open, the bed empty. Only a single paper star lay on the pillow, its blue edges crumpled. His throat tightened. "Oliver!" The house was silent except for the distant echo of retreating footsteps. By the time he reached the front hall, the black car was already gone, vanishing into the storm. Within minutes, police filled the property, their radios hissing through the wind. Nathan stood in the doorway, face pale, fists clenched. "They took my son," he said, his voice hollow. Rowan arrived an hour later, snow clinging to his coat. "We've set up roadblocks, but the storm's shutting everything down. Whoever did this planned for the weather." Nathan turned, his expression hardening. "It's Marcus," Rowan frowned. "You have proof?" "I don't need proof. I know him." Nathan's voice was steady now, the calm of a man past fear. "He wants control of CrossGen, and he knows exactly how to get it." Across town, Grace sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. She'd planned to leave Seattle that night, start fresh somewhere far away. But when she turned on the news and saw Nathan's face on the screen, pale and desperate, everything stopped. Breaking. Oliver Cross, son of former CrossGen CEO Nathan Cross, reported missing. Her breath caught. The reporter's voice blurred into noise. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and keys. She didn't know what she could do, but she couldn't stay still. Not when Oliver, the boy who once said snow stopped falling when she left, was out there somewhere in the cold. By midnight, the city had turned into a blur of white. The snowstorm had worsened, shutting down roads and cutting power lines. Grace drove slowly through the back streets, her wipers fighting against the wind. Then her phone buzzed. An unknown number, she answered. "Hello?" A voice she'd hoped never to hear again came through the line, smooth and venomous. "You always did care too much, Miss Miller." Her blood ran cold. "Marcus? You're clever," he said. Then again, clever girls are dangerous when they don't know when to quit. "Where's Oliver?" she demanded. He chuckled softly. "Safe for now, but Nathan won't get him back unless he signs over 51% of CrossGen's shares to me. A fair trade, don't you think?" "You're insane." "No, just efficient. Tell Nathan the clock is ticking. Midnight tomorrow, or his legacy disappears, just like his son." The line went dead. Grace's hands trembled on the wheel. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Then something inside her shifted. The same quiet resolve she'd felt the night she found Oliver under that banquet table. She couldn't wait for the police. She couldn't wait for Nathan. She had to move. She called Rowan. "It's Marcus. He has Oliver. How do you know?" "He called me." "Grace, listen. You need to stay out of this. Let us handle it." "I don't have time," she said, voice sharp. "If you track his call, you'll find him. I'm going after him now." "Grace." But she'd already hung up. Hours later, Grace's car crawled through the storm along the northern industrial road. Snow whipped across the windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. Her phone's GPS flickered in and out, but she followed instinct and the faint signal Rowan had managed to trace. Finally, she saw it. An old warehouse on the edge of the frozen docks, half buried in snow. She killed the headlights and stepped out, the wind slicing through her coat. The cold burned her lungs as she moved toward the building. Inside, faint light flickered from a single window. She slipped in through a side door, her boots silent on the concrete. The air smelled of metal and gasoline. Then she heard it, a small, muffled cry. Her heart stopped. "Oliver?" She followed the sound to the far corner where a rusted storage cage stood. Inside, the boy was bound to a chair, trembling but awake. "Grace!" he whispered, eyes wide. She rushed to him, kneeling beside the lock. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here," Marcus said. "Don't listen to him." She cut in softly. "We're going home." She reached for the padlock, trying to pry it open when footsteps echoed behind her. A shadow stretched across the floor. "Well," Marcus said from the doorway, voice smooth and cold. "You never could follow directions." Grace turned slowly. He stood there in a black coat, snow melting on his shoulders, a gun gleaming in his hand. "You don't have to do this," she said, her tone calm but firm. "He's just a child," Marcus tilted his head. "He's leverage, and leverage keeps empires alive. You're destroying everything Nathan built." He laughed. "Nathan built nothing. He inherited luck and sentiment. I built the future, and tonight I'll own it." He stepped closer, the gun steady. "Now be a good girl and sit down." Grace didn't move. Her mind raced. Behind her, Oliver's quiet sob broke the silence. She met Marcus's gaze. "You'll never win," he smiled thinly. "I already have." The sound of tires crunching on snow outside cut through the air. Marcus stiffened. Grace's heart leapt. The warehouse door burst open. Nathan stepped inside, his coat soaked, his eyes like steel. Let him go. Marcus raised the gun toward him. The fallen king arrives. You're late, Nathan. Always were. Nathan took a slow step forward. This ends now, Marcus smirked. You want your son? Sign over the company. 51% and you walk out of here alive. Nathan's jaw tightened. You think this is about money? You killed my wife, Marcus. You tried to destroy my son. You don't get to own anything ever again. Marcus's smile vanished. She wasn't supposed to be on that plane, he hissed. If she hadn't found out... That was all Nathan needed to hear. He lunged. The gun went off. Once, twice, deafening in the concrete space. The sound echoed against the walls, mingling with the scream of the storm outside. Grace threw herself over Oliver, shielding him as glass shattered around them. When she looked up, both men were on the floor, Marcus clutching his shoulder, blood blooming through his coat. Nathan sprawled nearby, motionless. Nathan, she cried, rushing to him. His eyes fluttered open, pain etched across his face. You're okay, she whispered, tears spilling. Please, you have to be okay. He tried to speak, his voice hoarse. Is he safe? Yes, she choked out. Oliver's safe. Nathan managed a weak smile. Good. That's all that matters. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, Rowan's team finally closing in. Marcus groaned, trying to reach for the gun again, but Rowan burst in first, weapon raised. Freeze! Grace held Nathan close as police flooded the warehouse. The storm roared outside, but inside time seemed to stop. Oliver clung to her, crying into her coat. Nathan's blood stained the snow beneath them, red against white. Grace pressed her forehead to his, whispering through her tears. Hold on, Nathan. Don't you dare let go now. His hand found hers, fingers trembling. Grace, he whispered, his voice fading like snow and wind. You made me believe again. Then his hand went still. The world went silent. Snow drifted through the broken window, landing gently on his face, melting against the warmth that was fading too fast. Grace didn't move. She held him as the storm howled around them, as the flashing lights painted the night in red and blue. Outside, the city slept beneath the snow, unaware that inside an abandoned warehouse, love and loss had collided one final time, leaving behind a silence so deep it could break even the coldest heart. For a long time, the world was nothing but snow and silence. Grace could still hear the echo of gunfire in her ears, still see Nathan's pale face beneath the storm's light. She remembered the warmth of his hand slipping from hers, the way his blood stained the snow like spilled ink. Then a darkness. When she opened her eyes again, it was morning. The storm had passed. She was in a hospital room, her fingers wrapped in a child's small hand. Oliver sat beside her, his eyes red from crying, his voice trembling. He's alive, he whispered. Dad's alive. Grace's breath caught. What? The boy nodded, a small, watery smile breaking through. They said he lost a lot of blood, but they saved him. He's sleeping now. Tears flooded her eyes before she could stop them. She held Oliver close, burying her face in his hair, whispering thank yous to no one in particular, to fate, to faith, to love, maybe even to the snow that never stopped falling that night. Nathan spent 3 days in intensive care, hovering between worlds. Grace refused to leave the hospital. She sat by his bed every night, reading softly from a book she found in the waiting room. Stories about light, about redemption. His hand was always cold, but she never stopped holding it. And when his fingers finally moved, when his eyes fluttered open, she let out a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding for days. The first thing Nathan saw was her face, pale from exhaustion, eyes rimmed red, but still smiling through it all. Hey, she whispered, her voice breaking. You took your time. He blinked, his lips parting with effort. You stayed. Where else would I go? He tried to speak again, but she pressed a finger gently to his lips. Don't, you're safe. Oliver's safe. Marcus, she paused, glancing toward the door. They arrested him. Rowan found everything, the offshore accounts, the files, even recordings from the night of the crash. Your wife's death, it wasn't an accident. Nathan's eyes darkened, pain and fury colliding behind them. He killed her, Grace nodded softly. He tried to destroy everything you built, but he failed. Nathan turned his head, staring out the hospital window. Snow was falling again, quiet, steady, endless. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted by it. The ghosts that once lived inside those flakes seemed to fade, replaced by something gentler. She didn't deserve that, he murmured. No one does, Grace replied. But you can honor her. By living, not by carrying the pain forever. He looked back at her then, and in his eyes she saw something shift, something melt. You saved my son, he said quietly. You saved me? She shook her head. You saved yourself? I just reminded you how. He smiled weakly. Still sounds like a miracle to me. A week later, the hospital released him. Cross Mansion was quiet when they returned, though it felt less like a fortress now, and more like a home rediscovering its heartbeat. Rowan's investigation had blown open a scandal that shook the city. The revelation that Marcus Hale had engineered the plane crash to seize control of CrossGen's biomedical project, which had the potential to revolutionize gene therapy. The board reinstated Nathan as CEO, issuing public apologies and promises of reform. But none of that mattered to him. The company could be rebuilt. What he cared about was the small family standing at his side. Oliver had changed too. The trauma, the silence. It didn't vanish overnight, but something inside him had shifted. He laughed more now, talked more, followed Grace around the house like a small shadow. Every night he added a new paper star to his wall. Hope. Family, Grace, snow. It happened one evening near Christmas Eve. Grace was in the living room, stringing paper stars across the fireplace mantel, when she felt a tug at her sleeve. Oliver stood there, holding a folded star in his hand. I made one for you, he said shyly. She smiled, crouching down. Can I see it? He handed it to her. On the star, written in uneven letters, were the words, Thank you for bringing the snow back. Her throat tightened. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes. You've always had the snow, Oliver. You just needed to remember. The boy grinned, and for the first time in 2 years, he spoke without hesitation. Clear, bright, and full of life. I remember now. Nathan had been standing at the doorway, watching the exchange in silence. The sound of his son's voice, real and steady, hit him like sunlight breaking through a storm. His eyes glistened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Grace turned to him, smiling softly. Told you the snow never really leaves. That night, they went outside together. The mansion's courtyard was covered in untouched snow, glowing beneath the string lights that draped the trees. Oliver ran ahead, leaving small footprints behind him. Grace followed slowly, tilting her head back to catch the falling flakes. Nathan joined her, his steps quiet in the snow. You know, he said, his voice gentle, I used to think snow was a curse. It took everything from me, my wife, my peace, my belief in love. But tonight, he paused, looking at her. It feels like it's giving something back. Grace smiled, her breath misting in the air. Maybe snow isn't about loss. Maybe it's about second chances. He stared at her for a long moment, the wind carrying her words like a whisper between them. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket. When he withdrew his hand, she froze. In his palm was a small silver ring, glinting softly under the lights. Nathan. He stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. Grace, I've spent years trying to rebuild what I lost. But somewhere along the way I realized, maybe I wasn't meant to rebuild. Maybe I was meant to begin again. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't have to say this. I do, he interrupted softly. You walked into my life with a paper snowflake and a smile that made my son believe again. You made me believe again. So, under this snow, I want to promise you something. He knelt down, the snow crunching beneath him. The world around them went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Grace Miller, he said, voice steady and warm. Under this falling snow, I promise I'll never let you face fear alone again. I'll never let the world take away your light, or ours. Marry me, Grace's breath hitched. The tears that spilled down her cheeks weren't from sadness, but from the impossible beauty of it all. The snow, the man, the little boy watching them from the porch. Smiling through the glow of Christmas lights, she nodded, laughing through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Nathan. He rose and pulled her into his arms, the ring glimmering between them. Snow fell around them like confetti from the heavens, soft and endless. And for the first time in years, Nathan Cross felt whole. Oliver ran toward them, giggling as snowflakes melted on his face. Nathan lifted him up, the three of them standing together beneath the falling white. A family born not of perfection, but of healing. As the clock struck midnight, the first bells of Christmas rang across the valley. Grace looked up, whispering into the cold night, "The snow's still falling." Nathan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It always will." And under that quiet storm of light and snow, they stood, three souls bound by love, by loss, by the promise that even in the coldest winters, warmth always finds its way home. 1 year later, the snow fell softer. It was the kind of snowfall that didn't rush, that drifted down like a whisper, patient, peaceful, familiar. The Cross estate, once a fortress of glass and silence, now glowed with warmth. Christmas lights wrapped around the trees. Music hummed faintly through open windows, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Inside, laughter echoed from the main hall. Grace Cross, no longer Grace Miller, was surrounded by children folding colored paper into tiny stars. She knelt beside a girl struggling with a crease, showing her how to fold gently, not forcefully. "See?" Grace said with a soft smile. "It's not about being perfect. It's about trying again." The girl smiled shyly, proud of her slightly crooked star. Around them, more children worked on their own, the room filled with small bursts of joy and chatter. A banner above the fireplace read, "Snowlight Foundation, 1-year anniversary." It had been a year since the storm, since Marcus's betrayal, since Nathan had nearly lost everything, and found more than he ever imagined. Together, he and Grace had built something new from the ashes, a foundation dedicated to helping children with trauma, anxiety, and depression. What started as one child's paper star therapy had become a movement of light. Grace called it the Snowlight Project because, as she liked to say, even snow reflects the sun if you give it a little warmth. Nathan watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, a soft smile on his face. He was still the man who carried 1,000 responsibilities, but something in his posture had changed. The weight he once bore, guilt, grief, loneliness, had eased. His eyes found Grace across the room, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. She caught his gaze and smiled, the same smile that had once calmed a frightened boy under a banquet table. Oliver stood beside him now, taller, brighter, full of life. He wore a little snowflake pin on his shirt, the emblem of their foundation, and a proud grin that never seemed to leave. "She's amazing, isn't she?" he said, watching Grace. Nathan looked down at his son, his voice low and warm. "She always was," Oliver grinned wider. "We're starting the next session soon. Can you help hang the stars?" "Of course," Nathan said, pretending to groan. "As long as you don't boss me around this time," Oliver laughed. "No promises, Dad." They worked side by side, hanging strands of folded paper stars across the windows, the same therapy that had once helped Oliver heal. Now, dozens of children came every week to learn how to turn fear into art, pain into light. The room shimmered with color, pink, blue, gold, each star carrying a word written in small handwriting: hope, family, courage, love. When the session ended, the children rushed outside to play in the snow. Grace stood by the window, watching them with quiet pride. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, the rhythm of his heartbeat steady against her. "They look happy," she whispered. "They are," he said, "because you taught them how to be." She turned her head slightly, smiling. "We taught them." For a while, they stood in silence, watching Oliver lead the other kids in building a giant snow fort. His laughter carried across the courtyard, bright and full. It was hard to believe that just a year ago, he had barely spoken. Now he ran toward life with both arms open. Nathan kissed the top of Grace's head. "I never thanked you properly," she laughed softly. "You married me, Nathan." "I think that counts." "Still," he murmured, You gave me back everything I thought I'd lost. My son, my peace, my heart. Grace turned to face him, her hands resting gently on his chest. You didn't lose them, she said quietly. They were just waiting for you to come home. He smiled, that rare, unguarded smile she loved most. You always make it sound so simple. Love usually is, she whispered. Outside, the wind carried the sound of children singing carols. Oliver's voice stood out among them, strong, cheerful, alive. He was helping the younger kids make snow angels, calling each one a star mark, saying every angel represented someone who believed again. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the fullness of it all. The kind of peace you only earn after surviving the storm. As dusk settled, the festival lights flickered on across the garden. Snow glowed under golden lamps, the air turning blue and silver. Guests began arriving for the Foundation's annual Christmas dinner. Investors, families, friends, all drawn by the story of one man's redemption and one woman's quiet miracle. When it was time for Nathan's speech, he stepped to the front of the room. The crowd quieted. Grace stood off to the side, Oliver beside her. Nathan's gaze swept over them both before he began. Last year, he said slowly, I thought my story had ended. I had lost my faith. In people, in the world, even in myself. But someone once told me that snow isn't about loss. It's about second chances. His eyes found Grace's. And she was right. The room listened in silence, the crackle of the fireplace the only sound. We started the Snowlight Foundation because we believe no child should face their fears alone, because kindness can heal what medicine sometimes can't, and because one act of compassion can change a life. I know because it changed mine. Applause filled the room, soft and heartfelt. Grace blinked back tears as Nathan stepped down, wrapping an arm around her and Oliver. Together they stood beneath the twinkling lights, the image of a family forged not by perfection, but by love that refused to quit. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house fell quiet, Grace and Nathan walked outside. Snow was falling again, slow, peaceful, endless. Oliver had fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by half-folded stars. Grace exhaled, her breath a small cloud in the cold. It feels like the world finally stopped spinning, she said softly. Nathan took her hand, squeezing gently. No, he whispered. It's just spinning in the right direction now. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Merry Christmas, Nathan. He looked up at the sky, the snow catching in his hair, and smiled back. Merry Christmas, Grace. For a long time, they stood there in the quiet, watching the snow drift down over the lights, over the trees, over everything they'd rebuilt together. And as the night deepened, a soft voice echoed in Grace's mind. The words she had once said to Oliver. Long ago. When you're scared, look at the snow. It will always remind you that everything can begin again. Because between every storm and every betrayal, there is one truth that never changes. Real love always finds its way back. And that was Veil of Hearts. A story of loss, healing and love finding its way back beneath the falling snow. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe so you never miss the next tale that warms the soul. Thank you for listening. And until next time, may your heart always find its light in the snow.